A third of all falls are from ladders, so the most obvious thing is to consider, is there a safer alternative? But that doesn't mean resorting to improvisations such as chairs or tables. You need to ask yourself, is there a way of doing the job that will eliminate the need to work at heights at all? Can the cable be run lower down? Is there another access point where you don't have to climb steps? Can you use something to reach with? If you do need to get higher up, then make sure you use the appropriate access equipment. Okay, Andy, we've come to a typical exchange to look at the steps and step ladders here. There's a number of different types, so could you just take me through them?
Yeah, sure. We'll start with this one, which is the Steps Mobile 1A. There is a 1B version, but both of them are now obsolescent. This is the ladder extension number 6, made of fiberglass, and it's used to gain a little bit of extra height in the exchange. And as you can see, it's hooked onto the tie bar metal at the top.
Yeah.
These are Steps Folding 9 tread. These are the wide version. There is a narrow version which is used in equipment aisles, and it should only be used in equipment aisles because they're quite unstable. They shouldn't be used anywhere else in the exchange.
Okay.
These are Steps Folding 7 tread. Again, this is the wide version. There is a narrow version of the 7 tread. Same rules apply, not to be used anywhere other than in equipment aisles.
Right, okay.
This is the Steps Swingback 5 tread, and at the side of it we've got the Steps Folding 5 tread. Now the Steps Folding are now obsolescent. On the floor we've got the Still number 3, which is commonly referred to as the elephant box.
Okay.
And there are, in some exchanges, cat ladders and gantries.
What's a gantry?
Well, on the larger MDFs, they don't have travelling ladders, they have a gantry which is positioned about halfway up the MDF, which makes access to the top part of the MDF that much easier.
So why so many different types of ladders?
Well, a lot of accidents have happened because people have used the incorrect equipment, and it's vitally important that whenever a job is being undertaken that a person selects and uses the correct access equipment.
The first thing to consider is if you actually need to use steps. Is there another way to reach where you need to work? As with everywhere you work, either in an exchange like this or on customers' premises, you must have the correct PPE. In some circumstances though, this isn't the norm. This may mean helmets, as well as eye shields and correct footwear. But this will depend on the work that is being undertaken. The next thing to look at is risk assessment. Has a risk assessment been done for the task?
Now, a generic risk assessment will have been carried out already, but it's your job to make sure that you do an on-site risk assessment.
Right, so slips, trips and falls.
Yes, good housekeeping comes into this. Make sure that all the route through the exchange is clear, there are no obstructions. The weather conditions could play a part. If it's a wet, rainy day, you could come in with wet shoes, slip on the exchange floor, so make sure you wipe your shoes before going into the exchange. Manual handling, lifting one of these ladders has got to be done correctly. And then of course the lighting, the weather outside, it may be a dull overcast day, casting shadows in the exchange. Make sure that all the lighting is working in the area where you're going to be working.
Okay, so check those. What's next?
Well, as part of the risk assessment, you've got to remember not to use any metal ladders within the exchange.
Why not?
Well, there are buzz bars in the exchange, and if the ladder contacts those bars, there is a chance of a serious accident.
So what do we use instead?
Well, anything used in the exchange has got to be made of non-conductive material.
Okay, like a wooden ladder?
Like a wooden step.
Like this one?
Yep. So if I was going to use this, I've got to carry out a number of checks. The first check I've got to do is a visual inspection.
Right.
And what I'm looking for here are any signs of cracks, any damage to the timber, any warping of the timber. Make sure that the stiles are parallel, make sure that the treads are parallel.
Okay, that it's not twisted or
not twisted in any way, shape or form.
Okay.
Some steps have a local serial number and you can see if they are within the annual inspection date. Although this is not a national practice, and in fact the label could hide imperfections in the wooden stiles. So you should always check the steps yourself, making sure that they are fit for use.
The rope. Make sure that the rope hasn't got any signs of fraying. Make sure the knots at both ends are intact and held in position.
Yeah.
And make sure that both lengths of rope are the same.
Right, okay.
Check the hinges.
Yep.
At the back you'll see that there are 2 hinges screwed and bolted through the timber.
Okay. So what about the treads?
It's the same as all the rest of the woodwork. Make sure that there are no cracks or splits in the tread. Make sure that there's no debris that's accumulated in the grooves on the tread. If there is, just simply brush it off.
Yeah, and make sure that nobody's left anything lying on the treads as
Yeah,
well.
if there are any tools on there, you don't want to be standing on the tools, neither do you want the tools falling on you.
So if it doesn't meet the standards, what are you going to do?
Well, you're not going to use it, take it out of service, and because it's a piece of equipment that's found in the exchange, label it so that anybody else coming in knows that it's not fit for use.
Okay.
And then the final thing, make sure you fully extend them, make sure that they're sat squarely on the floor, and then hands on the top, make sure that they don't wobble or rock.
Right.
And finally, if the steps have been left open, just check that no tools or equipment have been left on a step. You could have quite a nasty accident if a pair of pliers fell on you when you move them.
Some of these look pretty heavy.
Yeah, the elephant box, for example, is made of thick plywood, and there are handles on there which are to help you with lifting. Now, you could use a single hand lift or a two-handed lift. If I was going to pick it up with one hand, I'm going to use a manual lifting technique, bend the knees, don't bend the back, hand in the hole, and then just simply lift, and I can carry it a short distance on one hand. The other option is to use two hands, and that would involve the handles on the end here, lift, and then I can just simply carry that.
Okay, what are these stops for on the end?
Well, the stops are to prevent inappropriate use. Someone might decide that the only thing they've got is the elephant box, and they need to get that little bit of extra height.
Right.
So I'll stand it on the end. Well, if I stand it on the end,
Yeah.
those rubber stops should indicate to me that it isn't to be used in that manner.
Okay. How would I go about moving something like this?
Well, these can be carried in two ways, in a similar manner that you'd carry an ordinary extension ladder.
Okay.
Fold them up, making sure that you don't trap your fingers between the stiles. And if I'm only going to carry them a short distance, I can actually lean them against the shoulder and then carry them in that manner.
Right.
But that's only for short distances.
Okay.
If I want to carry them for a longer distance, then onto the shoulder and up and on the shoulder and carry them as I would a ladder.
Okay.
One thing that you must never do with steps of this nature, or indeed with a ladder, is to actually put your arm through and carry them with your arm through the ladder.
Right, just in case you fall over.
Yeah, if you fall over, the ladder is going to come with you.
Right.
And the chances are you're going to break your collarbone.
Okay. Well, these look a bit heavy for just one person to carry.
Yeah, most steps can be carried by one person, but those must be carried by two.
Right.
Right, you've selected the correct steps for the work that's going to take place. And what I'm going to ask you to do is actually work in the top cabinet on this particular rack. So position the steps as close to the rack as you can.
Okay.
Make sure that you fully extend them.
Yeah.
So make sure that the steps don't rock or wobble. And what we've also got to consider is other people who might be in the exchange, especially if this work position is near a walkway or a blind corner. The last thing you want is somebody coming around that corner and walking straight into your steps.
Yeah.
So some form of guarding will have to be provided, bearing in mind that the metal guards that you would normally see around a hole in the road couldn't be used within the exchange, for the same reasons that we were talking about with metal ladders. So something like hazard tape, would be an alternative.
Okay.
Right, what you've got to consider is you're going to climb these steps. Is there anything up there that could cause you a problem?
Right. Which there is.
Yeah, we've only got to look up and we can see that there's a chunk of metal up there, and there's also a light fitting, both of which you could bump your head on. So it would be advisable to wear a safety helmet for this particular task.
Right. Okay.
Climbing the steps, there are a number of things to bear in mind. When you climb, always face the steps.
Right.
When you descend, always face the steps. When you're working on the steps, don't overreach either to the left or to the right. What it actually says is try and keep your belly button within the width of the stiles.
Right, okay.
And that makes sure that your centre of gravity stays within the widest base of the steps themselves.
Right.
So
I'm ready to climb now?
What I'd like you to do is to climb to a position that you're going to be comfortable in to work in this top cabinet.
Okay, right. Okay, well, if I get so far, and I need to keep balance. Is it all right to hold on to it?
Yeah, it's okay to hold on to the metalwork. If there's something there to stabilise you, then feel free to use it.
Okay. What happens if I'm carrying something up the steps?
Right. The best thing is if it has to be carried to that position, then get somebody else to hand it to you. You climb safely to your working position and then have the object handed to you.
Okay. Right. Well, I'm here now, so I've got to open this.
Yeah. So that's going to involve a pulling action, and any pulling, pushing, or turning actions. Say you're undoing a bolt up there, could result in a sudden release.
Right.
If you're pulling a cable, it could suddenly come towards you.
Okay.
Well, being on steps, you can't step backwards, can you? So what you're going to have to do is to bear that in mind, and if possible, lean into the task in hand.
Right.
So what I'd like to do is grab hold of the handles on that,
Okay.
and then just pull it gently towards you.
Okay. And I'm still leaning in.
You're leaning against the steps.
Okay.
So now you're in that position, working in the cabinet. A thing you've got to bear in mind is time. You don't want to be working up a pair of steps for any great length of time.
Okay.
30 minutes is the recommended maximum, because your body's in not an awkward, but an unusual position,
Yeah.
and it can be a little bit tiring.
Okay. All right. So
So that's the work completed. Push the door back in place, and then, as we said before, come down, making sure that you face the steps on
Right.
your descent.
Okay. There you go.
Well, this is the Steps Mobile 1A, along with the Steps Mobile 1B. They can be found in exchanges, but they are obsolescent now, so they're going to become fewer and fewer
Right.
as the years go by.
Okay.
The major difference between the two is that the 1A has got automatic braking by the 4 contact pads that you can see on the
Right.
corner. We'll have a look at those in a minute in more detail. The 1B has got a big brake lever on the side of it, and if you're using the 1B, you must always operate the brake before
Right.
climbing the ladder.
Okay.
Anyway, the 1A, have a look at the metalwork. Make sure there's no obvious signs of damage to the metalwork. The treads of the steps, you can see, have got a rubber insert.
Yeah.
Make sure that that's firmly fixed to the step, and it's also clean.
Right.
The braking mechanism is activated by you standing on the steps, because at the moment you'll find that it moves quite freely.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And to
Okay.
activate it, if you stand on the bottom step, you'll find now that the 2 contact pads at the front here have gone down onto the exchange floor,
Yep.
and you can't move it. The further you climb up those steps, it will then activate the other 2,
Yeah.
and you've now got all 4 contact pads on the ground. So that's a check that you must do before using them. The last
Okay.
thing you want is those rolling away with you on them.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. What about this one?
Well, this is the ladder extension number 6. It's not often found, but it's ideal for people like exchange construction staff. And in an exchange like this, if they were taking cables from here up into the ceiling void,
Yeah.
they can be hooked onto the tie bars adjacent to where the cables are going through the ceiling, and it gives a very, very stable platform for the person to work on.
Right.
Made of fiberglass, non-conductive, ideal for use in the exchange.
Okay. So the same usual checks anyway.
Exactly the same checks as you do with any ladder.
Yeah.
All the metal fittings, all the movable fittings, make sure they're okay. The rubber feet need checking, make sure they're intact
Yeah.
and in good condition.
Okay.
You'll notice it's got a rope on the top, very similar to the external ladders. Make sure that's in good condition, and there's a clam cleat up there. Because if you wanted to, you could actually tie that to the bar at the top.
Right.
to
Because it
make
goes right to the top. Obviously, if I was
Yes.
going to climb that headgear for this.
Hard hat needs to be worn,
Yeah.
and the climbing of this ladder, it is exactly the same as any other. Always put your hands on the rungs.
Oh right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Okay. What about these ones over here?
Well, the travelling ladder over here is probably the safest ladder you're going to find in any exchange, provided that they're used properly. Now, because I'm going within a metre of the frame, and we've got a mandatory sign down there saying that eye protection must be worn, I'm going to put the eye shields on.
Okay.
And this is a common sight that you're going to find in every exchange. When you enter, the ladder will be in the down position.
Right.
Whenever you leave an exchange, the ladder is always supposed to be in the park position.
Okay.
Now, the park position involves lifting the ladder, locating that metal bar on the brake handle, turning the ladder through 90 degrees, and then there's a little latching mechanism which just simply latches it to the bottom rail of the MDF.
Oh, okay.
Now that leaves me with a clear walkway down the side of the MDF.
Okay. So we're going to use these now.
Yeah.
So can you just show me what you do?
Right. Unpark it. Turn it back through 90 degrees so it's in line with
Yeah.
the MDF. Release the mechanism. And we've now got to do a visual check
Yeah.
of the ladder. One of the first things to look for is this label. Every travelling ladder has got to be formally examined once a year and marked accordingly on the label.
Okay.
If you find a label that hasn't got a current test date on it, then the ladder shouldn't be used.
Right, okay.
It's still, though, your job to inspect, even if it has a current test date. So looking at the ladder, check the woodwork, make sure there's no signs of splits
Yep.
or damage to any of the treads, make sure there's no splits or damage to the stiles, and make sure when looking at the ladder head on that the two stiles are parallel. Any warping or any distortion, then the ladder could be weakened.
Okay.
All the metalwork, starting at the top, we've got the support tube, we've got the braces, and we've got the brake handle. Make sure that all of those are held in place. You can see split pins with washers, nuts and bolts, all of them need to be in place.
Right.
Any signs of damage to the metalwork, and then the ladder needs taking out of service.
Okay.
The braking mechanism needs to be checked, and at the moment the ladder shouldn't move.
Right.
The only time it should move is if I pull down on that handle.
Okay.
Pull down and the ladder now moves freely along the
Okay,
track.
so I take it you shouldn't be stood on it when you pull that.
Never stand on the ladder and operate that
Okay.
handle. And never stand on the ladder and get somebody else to operate the
Right.
handle.
Okay. What about the run it's on?
Right, the rail that it's running on has got to be secured to the tie bars in the exchange.
Okay.
And it's quite easy to check that. If you grab hold of the brake, release it, move the ladder along the track, you can actually see that the track is rigid,
Yeah.
not moving in any way, shape or form. If there was any movement up there, then don't use the ladder.
Okay. All right.
Working your way down, you'll notice metal underneath each of the steps.
Uh-huh.
Make sure that that's intact and that all the screws are in place.
Mm-hmm.
Any metalwork that crosses from stile to stile, make sure that that's fixed and
Right.
firmly in place. And then working your way right down to the bottom of the ladder, the two wheels should be free to turn. Well, we know they are already because we've released the brake
Yeah.
and it rolls freely. And the metalwork at the bottom here should be bolted securely to the stiles, both sides, and the little latching mechanism has got a spring on it.
So if there was anything wrong, what would we do?
Well, the first thing to do is to put the ladder up into the park position, latch it against the bottom rail of the MDF, and make sure that you also tie it to that bottom rail with a piece of suitable rope. Now that could be a piece of sash line.
Right.
And then you've got to hang a label on the ladder to make sure that anybody coming along knows that there's something wrong with it and it's not to be used.
Okay, well this one's fine as far as I can see.
Seems okay.
So what do I do before I get up?
Well, have a little look round the floor at the base of the ladder, because the last thing you want to be doing is stepping on pieces of wire.
Right.
It's not so bad when you're going up, you can see them, but it's when you're coming back down. If
Yeah.
you come back down, put your foot on it, it could slip away from you.
Okay. All right then.
As you climb, make sure that you hold the stiles of the ladder as you climb,
Yep.
and get yourself then into a comfortable position to carry out the work on the block that you've been allocated.
Okay.
And don't forget, as you're climbing the ladder, keep a constant check to make sure that there are no tools on any of the steps, in particular soldering irons. You know, the last thing you want to do is put your hand on a hot soldering iron. When you get to the working position, and don't forget, for this particular work activity, you're going to be pushing the insulation displacement connector into those blocks. So make sure you've got a good firm stance
Right.
on the ladder. You don't want to be unsettling yourself as you insert the wires.
Okay. So after I've done that job, it's basically the same, coming down,
Yeah.
just be careful on the
Always
side.
come back down, holding the stiles,
Yeah.
come down in reverse. You've already cleared the floor.
Yeah.
And when you get towards the bottom of the ladder, make sure that you come all the way down the ladder and then step onto the floor. Don't jump off 2 or 3 steps up.
Right.
There have been several accidents where people have misjudged where they are on the ladder, they've fallen, and it has resulted in broken bones.
Okay. Okay, well I'm down, I've done that job. Is there any other ladders?
There's only one that I can think of in this exchange, and that's the cat ladder. So do you want to go and have a look at that one?
Okay Andy, so this is a cat ladder.
Yeah, and this one just happens to be in the equipment room, but you can find them in manholes. You can also find them going from the equipment rooms down into cable chambers. And more importantly, you can find them on customers' premises.
Okay, so well I'm going to climb this, but got to do the usual checks, yeah?
Yeah, visual inspection, have a look at welds, have a look at the metalwork in general, are there any signs of rusting, and a very important thing to check are the fixing bolts. Well, on this one you can see that there are 2 right up at the top end there. Make sure that they appear to be, you know, sound
and attached to the wall.
Right. Okay, so I'm ready to climb. Is there anything I should know?
Yeah, there's a few pointers. You must make sure that you hold the rungs.
Right.
Make sure that your hands don't go above shoulder height.
Okay.
And climb with left hand, left foot in unison.
Yeah.
Right hand, right foot in unison.
Okay.
Because the ladder's vertical, you've got to make sure you've got a good hold with your hand. And it's also important that you make sure that your foot is well forward on the rung with the step of the heel right up against the
Right.
rung.
Okay. Right. So, let's give that a go. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. And then as you come down, particularly if you're going down into a cable chamber, always keep a check on what's below you. You don't want to be stepping onto something which could cause an accident.
Right. Okay. Let's just look at the key points again for steps in the exchange. Check if you really need to use the steps, and if you can plan the work to remove the need to use steps, then do so. Make sure you use the right steps for the job. Make sure you have the correct PPE, especially footwear and eye shields. Perform a thorough risk assessment. Check the steps are fit for use, including issue number and inspection date. Position the steps in a safe place. Guard and sign if necessary. Ascend and descend facing the steps, keeping at least one hand on the stile or on the handrail. Check for overhead obstructions. Do not overreach.